The house smelled like roses and wine. Soft jazz hummed from the old stereo in the corner, the same one they had bought together when Clinton was still in office. Evelyn Monroe stood in her kitchen, smoothing the satin of her birthday dress, glancing at the clock, and listening for the familiar rhythm of her husband's footsteps. Tonight was her 45th birthday, and after 20 years of marriage, Thomas had promised to make it special. He always did. Every year, without fail, he remembered the day she was born. No matter how hard money had been, no matter what storms they had weathered, he always showed up with something. Flowers from the corner store, a necklace bought on credit, or simply a home-cooked meal with candles. It was his ritual, his way of reminding her, we're still us. And Evelyn believed him. She wanted to believe him. When Thomas appeared in the doorway, carrying a bouquet of crimson roses, Evelyn felt her breath catch. His hair had gone silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but he still carried himself like the young man she had fallen for, the man who had made her laugh on their very first date at a cheap diner. "Happy birthday, Evie," he said, holding out the roses with a grin. She smiled, her eyes glassy. "You never forget." "Not in 20 years. Not in 50, Thomas answered. He leaned forward, kissed her cheek, and for a moment, the years melted away. They moved into the dining room together. Thomas had gone all out. Candles flickered along the table, 2 glasses of champagne stood waiting, and in the center sat a cake, frosted white with pink lettering. "Happy birthday, Evelyn." Evelyn shook her head. "Thomas, you didn't have to." "Of course I did." He raised his glass, waiting for her to follow suit. "To you. To us. To 20 more years." The words warmed her, but they also echoed against a small, locked box in her chest, the one where she had buried her doubts. For years, little shadows had crept in. Unexplained late nights, strange phone calls, receipts for motels that Thomas had dismissed as business trips. She had caught whiffs of cologne that wasn't his, faint traces of perfume on his shirts. And then there were the doctor visits. Thomas had quietly gone to see a urologist more than once, something he brushed off with a joke about getting old. Evelyn hadn't pushed. She told herself that pressing too hard might break what they had. Better to pretend. Better to believe. She lifted her glass and clinked it against his. "To us." They ate. They laughed. They shared stories about the early days of their marriage, how broke they had been, how they had lived on takeout and hope. Thomas teased her about burning the first dinner she ever cooked for him. Evelyn rolled her eyes, smacking his hand playfully across the table. It felt almost perfect, but perfection has a way of making silence louder. As she watched Thomas sip his wine, Evelyn noticed the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his hand shook just slightly as he reached for the bread. She frowned, filing the thought away, trying not to let suspicion take root. Tonight wasn't about suspicion. Tonight was about love, about gratitude, about survival after 2 decades together. "You've kept your promise," she whispered, half to herself. Thomas cocked his head. "Promise that no matter how rough things got, you'd never let me feel forgotten." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His palm was warm, but damp, like he'd been sweating. "Evie, you are my world. Always have been. Always will be." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his eyes. She squeezed his hand, forcing herself to silence the nagging voice that whispered, "But what about the lies? What about the nights he wasn't here?" For years, she had silenced that voice. She had convinced herself that every marriage carried secrets, that perfection was an illusion, that what mattered was that he came home to her. She had built her life around that belief, brick by fragile brick. Tonight, she decided, she would let herself believe it again. As the candles flickered, casting golden light across Thomas's face, Evelyn thought about the girl she used to be, young, hopeful, desperate to be loved. That girl had found her prince, and despite the cracks in his crown, she had stayed by his side for 2 decades. She leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine, smiling as Thomas began to hum along with the jazz. The moment felt suspended in amber, warm and delicate. For a fleeting second, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine the next 20 years unfolding just like this. Birthdays, anniversaries, quiet dinners, the steady rhythm of love. But somewhere deep inside her, beneath the laughter and the candles, something else stirred. A tension she couldn't name. A storm waiting to break. She couldn't have known that in just a few minutes, The illusion she had clung to for 20 years would collapse in the most grotesque, unimaginable way. That the man sitting across from her, the man who had toasted her life, carried inside him a truth so foul, so unbearable, that it would shatter not only their marriage but her very sanity. For now, Evelyn only smiled. For now, she was still living inside the lie. The night had unfolded like a carefully rehearsed play. The candles glowed, the wine softened Evelyn's nerves, and Thomas seemed more attentive than he had in years. For a fleeting moment, she thought maybe, just maybe, the doubts she had buried all these years were nothing more than paranoia. But then she saw it. It happened so quickly that her mind refused to process it at first. Thomas shifted in his chair, a grimace twisting his face as though a sharp pain stabbed through him. He pressed his hand to his lap, trying to mask it with a half-hearted smile. Evelyn tilted her head, her brow furrowed. "You okay?" she asked, setting down her glass. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "Just stomach cramps. Must be the wine." But his eyes flicked downward nervously, betraying him. Evelyn followed his gaze. And that's when she froze. Something pale and wriggling slid out from the front of his trousers. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, that the wine had blurred her vision. But no, there it was, unmistakable. A maggot, white, slick, alive, squirming against the dark fabric before falling onto the floor. For a split second, her brain locked. The world narrowed to that single, grotesque movement. She blinked hard, her pulse slamming in her throat. "Thomas," her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. What the hell is that?" Thomas stiffened, his face draining of color. He clutched at his lap, as if trying to hold himself together, as if trying to shove the truth back inside. "Evie, please. Don't panic. I can explain." But there was no explanation. Not for this. Evelyn's stomach lurched, while rising in her throat. She shoved her chair back, the legs screeching against the hardwood. The candlelight wavered, throwing shadows across his stricken face. "A maggot just crawled out of you," she spat, her voice trembling with disbelief and disgust. "Out of your—" She couldn't even finish the sentence. The word stuck like poison in her throat. Thomas lifted his hands, palms out, a desperate gesture. "It's not what you think." Her laugh was jagged, broken. "Not what I think." "Then what is it, Thomas?" "Because it looks like my husband is rotting from the inside out." The room thickened with silence, broken only by the soft jazz still playing from the stereo, a cruel, mocking soundtrack to the nightmare unfolding. Evelyn's chest heaved. Every memory, every suspicion she had buried over the last 2 decades clawed its way back to the surface. The late nights, the perfume, the secret doctor visits. And now this. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice low and sharp. "All these years you've lied. You've been sneaking around, and now look at you." Her hand trembled as she pointed at the floor, where the maggot still writhed. "You brought this filth into our home. Into me." Thomas's voice broke. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Evie. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see me like this. Like this." She laughed bitterly, hysteria creeping in. "Like a corpse at my birthday dinner?" She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the table for balance. The cake sat between them, mocking her with its sugary pink frosting. "Happy birthday, Evelyn." A celebration that had turned into a grotesque stage play, her husband the diseased actor, her role the unsuspecting audience of one. Her vision blurred with tears. 20 years of marriage, of trust, of sacrifice, obliterated in a single, horrifying moment. The man she had devoted her life to wasn't a partner anymore. He was a walking deception, a decaying secret wrapped in skin. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice rising. How long? How long have you been carrying this inside you?" Thomas's shoulders slumped. He looked smaller, weaker than she had ever seen him. His lips quivered, but no words came. His silence was louder than any confession. Evelyn's mind raced. If this was in him, if he had been sick, if his body was crawling with decay, what had he given to her? She felt suddenly contaminated, poisoned by every touch, every kiss, every night they had shared. The thought made her skin crawl, her stomach churn. "Oh my God," she whispered, backing away. "You've been killing me slowly. Every time you touched me, every time you lied, you were killing me." Thomas pushed up from his chair, reaching across the table. "Evie, please. Don't you dare touch me," she screamed, her voice cracking like glass. The scream shattered whatever fragile illusion remained. The birthday glow evaporated, leaving only cold dread in its place. Evelyn's chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, her mind spinning. She had lived 20 years with a man she thought she knew, only to discover she had been sharing her life with a stranger, a liar, a monster. Her gaze flicked to the hallway, where the bedroom waited. And inside that bedroom, inside the dresser, was the pistol Thomas had given her for protection years ago. For protection. She almost laughed at the bitter irony. Evelyn's legs moved before her mind could catch up. She pushed away from the table, her heels clacking against the floor as she stumbled toward the hall. Behind her, Thomas's voice followed, broken and pleading. "Evie, don't. Please, we can fix this. We can get help." But Evelyn didn't hear him. Or maybe she refused to. The sound of his voice was drowned by the pounding of her own heartbeat, the echo of that maggot writhing on the floor, the sickening realization that her life had been nothing but a rotting lie. She reached the bedroom door, her hand trembling as she pulled it open. Her reflection flashed in the dresser mirror, a woman not celebrating her birthday, but standing on the edge of a breakdown, mascara streaking her cheeks, rage and heartbreak twisting her face. Her fingers closed around the cold steel of the gun. In that instant, the warmth of roses and candles vanished, replaced by the icy certainty that the man she had loved for 20 years was already gone. What sat in her dining room wasn't her husband anymore. It was death, dressed in familiar clothes. And she would not let death sit across from her at her birthday table any longer. The weight of the gun in her hand felt unreal, like she was holding someone else's nightmare. Evelyn's fingers shook as she gripped the handle, the cold steel biting against her palm. She could still hear the faint jazz drifting from the dining room, cheerful notes that now felt obscene, as if the music itself was mocking her. She stepped back into the hallway, her heels tapping across the hardwood. Each step sounded like a drumbeat, like the countdown to something she couldn't take back. Thomas was waiting in the dining room, still on his feet, his face slick with sweat. He turned toward her, and when he saw the pistol, his eyes widened in horror. "Evie, no. Put that down." His voice cracked. "Please. This isn't you." Evelyn's chest heaved as she lifted the weapon, her arms trembling. "You don't know me anymore, Thomas. You don't know what you've done to me." He raised his hands, palms out like a man begging for his life. "I was trying to protect you." Her laugh tore out, harsh and bitter. "Protect me? A maggot just crawled out of you at my birthday dinner. You've been rotting, Thomas. Rotting while I've been loving you." Her voice broke on the last words, the rage and grief tangled in her throat. He stumbled closer, cautiously, like he was approaching a wild animal. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I thought I could fix it. I thought." "Fix it?" she snapped, her finger tightening against the trigger. "You thought you could hide 20 years of lies. You thought you could crawl into my bed, touch me with that, and call it love." The maggot, still squirming on the floor near the table leg, caught her eye. Evelyn gagged, while rising, but she refused to look away. That thing wasn't just flesh. It was the truth. It was the embodiment of every secret, every betrayal he had shoved down her throat. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you know what it's like to build your whole life on a lie? To find out, after 20 years, that the man you trusted was poisoning you?" Tears streamed down her cheeks, streaking her mascara, but her hand didn't waver this time. "Evie, listen to me," Thomas pleaded, his voice breaking. "I made mistakes. I was weak, but I never stopped loving you." "Love?" She spat the word like venom. "You call this love?" Her arm extended fully now, the pistol aimed squarely at his chest. He stared at her, his lips trembling. For a fleeting second, she saw the boy she had fallen in love with, the boy who had brought her cheap daisies, who had danced with her barefoot in their first apartment. That ghost flickered in front of her, begging her to stop. But then her eyes fell back on the maggot, on the betrayal crawling out of him, and she knew there was no ghost left. Only rot. Thomas tried one last time, his voice shaking. "Evie, don't do this. We can get help. Please, don't throw your life away." She stepped closer, the barrel of the gun steady now, her voice low and raw. "I already threw my life away when I married you." The silence before the shot was deafening. Then the crack of gunfire split the air. The bullet hit him square in the chest. Thomas's body jerked violently, his arms flailing as the glass of champagne slipped from his fingers and shattered across the floor. He stumbled backward, collapsing onto the table. The cake tipped sideways, smearing frosting and blood across the white tablecloth. Roses scattered to the floor, petals mixing with shards of glass. Evelyn stood frozen, the gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. The ringing in her ears drowned out everything else. The music, the sound of his body hitting the wood, the thud of his final breath. Her husband, the man she had loved and trusted for 20 years, lay sprawled across the birthday table, lifeless eyes staring into nothing. A candle tipped and dripped hot wax onto his shirt, hissing against the blood. The sight should have broken her. Instead, it hollowed her. She dropped the gun onto the floor with a clatter, her hands covering her mouth as a sob tore free. She backed away, nearly tripping over her own chair. The words tumbled from her lips in a broken chant. He lied. He lied. He lied. She pressed her back against the wall, sliding down to the floor as tears streamed down her face. For years she had imagined confronting him, screaming at him, demanding answers. But never this. Never blood on a birthday cake. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the writhing maggot, the lies in his eyes, the crack of the gun. And though her body trembled, though she wept, a terrible stillness settled over her. It was done. The man she thought she had married had died long before the bullet left the chamber. She had only given shape to the truth that he was gone, and she was left with the ruins. The stereo still played softly in the background, oblivious. The saxophone hummed a mournful tune as Evelyn sat shaking on the floor, mascara streaking down her cheeks, staring at the corpse of the man who had been her entire world. She whispered into the silence, her voice trembling but resolute. "Happy birthday to me." The silence after the shot was unbearable. Evelyn sat slumped against the wall, her breaths ragged, her ears ringing, her eyes locked on the body sprawled across the dining table. Thomas's chest had stopped rising. The blood spread slowly across the white tablecloth, seeping into the cake, mixing frosting with crimson. The candles still burned, flickering in the draft, their tiny flames oblivious to the destruction around them. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Her hands trembled, her mouth tasted of iron, her skin clammy with cold sweat. She had done it. She had killed the man she thought she'd grow old with, the man who had lied to her, rotted in front of her, and taken her life down with him. Her body shook with sobs, but her mind remained eerily clear. She remembered every second, the maggot, the lies, the begging, the shot. There was no rewinding, no undoing. What had been done was final. Outside, the world carried on. A car drove past the house. A dog barked in the distance. Then, faintly, the sound of a neighbor's voice. "Did you hear that?" The gunshot had not gone unnoticed. Within minutes, the wail of sirens shattered the quiet night. Red and blue lights splashed across the walls through the window, cutting across the soft glow of candles. Evelyn lifted her head, blinking against the strobing colors. She didn't move. She didn't run. She didn't even think to hide the weapon. The pistol still lay on the floor where it had slipped from her hand. A loud knock shook the front door. "Police. Open up." Evelyn didn't respond. Her voice was gone, swallowed by the chaos inside her. The door burst open, officers storming in with weapons drawn. Their boots thudded against the hardwood, their shouts colliding with the music still playing from the stereo. The sight that met them froze even the most hardened among them. A man sprawled dead across a decorated table, blood soaking into a birthday cake, and a woman in a party dress sitting against the wall, mascara streaks cutting down her cheeks, staring blankly at the wreckage. One officer called out, "Gun on the floor." Another rushed forward, kicking the weapon away. Detective Marcus Hill entered behind them, his tall frame filling the doorway. He had seen plenty in his 20 years on the force, but nothing like this. A birthday turned crime scene. Candles still burning, roses scattered across a blood-stained floor. He crouched down, leveling his gaze with Evelyn's. "Mrs. Monroe?" His voice was calm but firm. "I need you to stay with me. Do you understand?" Her lips parted, but only a whisper escaped. "He lied." Marcus leaned closer. "Put your hands where I can see them." Evelyn lifted her trembling hands slowly, palms out, her eyes never leaving Thomas's body. "What happened here?" Marcus asked, his tone careful, almost gentle. She turned her head toward him, her voice hoarse. "He gave me 20 years of lies. Tonight, I gave him the truth." The room fell silent. The officers exchanged glances, but no one spoke. The stereo continued to hum, the saxophone soft and mournful, as though the music itself understood the tragedy. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Her face was pale, her mascara smeared, her birthday dress wrinkled and stained with sweat. She didn't look like a murderer. She looked like a woman whose entire world had collapsed in one grotesque moment. He gestured to the officers. Cuff her. Read her rights. As the cold metal clasped around her wrists, Evelyn didn't resist. She didn't flinch. She simply kept her eyes fixed on the man she had killed, the man who had been her everything and her nothing all at once. The officers led her to her feet. She swayed, her knees buckling, and Marcus steadied her with a firm hand. Easy, he said quietly. She whispered again, as if to herself. Happy birthday. The words made Marcus's stomach twist. They escorted her outside, where the night air hit her like a slap. Neighbors stood on porches, their faces pale in the flashing lights. Some clutched robes around their bodies, others held cell phones, recording, whispering. Evelyn kept her gaze on the ground, her tears dripping onto the pavement. Behind her, paramedics entered the house, but Marcus knew it was too late. He didn't need to hear their confirmation. One look at Thomas Monroe told him the man's story was over. The detective lingered at the doorway, surveying the scene. The table set for two, the cake with its mocking message, the roses scattered like an afterthought. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was a love story gone rancid, a celebration turned horror. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. What the hell happened in here, he muttered. Inside the squad car, Evelyn sat in silence. The cuffs bit into her wrists, the seatbelt pressed against her chest, but none of it mattered. Her gaze was empty, her thoughts replaying the moment again and again. The maggot, the lies, the gunshot. As the car pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of the house through the window. The candles still flickered in the dining room, their flames stubbornly clinging to life even as everything else had been extinguished. For Evelyn Monroe, there was no more illusion, no more birthday, no more marriage. Only the echo of a gunshot and the knowledge that the life she had built had crumbled into ash. The room was cold, painted in dull gray, with nothing but a metal table, 2 chairs, and a buzzing fluorescent light that flickered like it had grown tired of doing its job. Evelyn Monroe sat slumped in her chair, her hands cuffed in front of her, her eyes swollen from crying. Her birthday dress clung to her, wrinkled and stained, the satin now a cruel reminder of what the night was supposed to be. Detective Marcus Hill sat across from her, a notepad and pen resting in front of him. He studied her for a long moment before speaking, his voice calm, measured, but edged with steel. Mrs. Monroe, you understand why you're here. Evelyn lifted her eyes slowly, red-rimmed and empty. Because I killed him. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table. That's one way to put it. But I want to understand why. Her lips trembled. She let out a sharp laugh that quickly turned into a sob. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Try me, Marcus said evenly. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as the words poured out. A maggot crawled out of him. Out of my husband. While he was sitting there, smiling at me, pretending everything was fine. And I realized, in that moment, he'd been lying to me for 20 years. 20 years. Marcus's pen hovered above his pad. His eyes flicked up, steady on hers. A maggot. Her shoulders shook. You think I'm crazy, don't you? But it happened. I saw it. It wasn't just a bug. It was the truth. The truth he couldn't keep inside anymore. Marcus didn't react, didn't roll his eyes, didn't call her delusional. He just let the silence hang, the weight of her words filling the space. Evelyn pressed on, her voice rising with each sentence. Do you know what it's like to dedicate your whole life to a man, to trust him completely, only to realize he's been dragging filth into your bed, that he's been rotting inside while you kiss him goodnight? Marcus tapped his pen once against the pad. You think he was unfaithful? Her eyes flashed. I know he was. The late nights, the perfume on his clothes, the doctor visits he wouldn't explain. I ignored it all. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself love was enough. And then, her voice cracked, tears spilling again. Then I saw it. And I knew. Marcus scribbled a note. And that's when you got the gun. Evelyn shook her head violently. No, that's when I lost myself. I didn't think. I didn't plan it. I couldn't breathe. It felt like everything I'd lived for was a lie, like the floor dropped out from under me. And then I was in the bedroom, and the gun was in my hand. Her eyes fixed on Marcus, wild and pleading. What would you have done, detective? If your whole life collapsed in 1 second, if the person you trusted most turned into a monster before your eyes, what would you have done? Marcus sat back, his jaw tight. He'd been on the job long enough to know better than to answer. But her words pressed into him all the same. He flipped a page in his notepad. Tell me about the doctor visits. What kind of problems was he having? Evelyn's face twisted. He said it was just age. Said men his age had issues sometimes. But I knew better. I saw the prescriptions, the bills. Urology. Infections. Things that didn't add up. He was seeing doctors I'd never met, in clinics far from home. Always secretive, always brushing me off. Her voice hardened, sharp as glass. And then I wondered, what had he been doing to need those doctors? Who had he been with? She looked down at her cuffed hands, her thumbs rubbing raw against each other. I thought maybe he just didn't love me anymore. But it wasn't that. He loved his lies more than me. He loved his filth more than me. Marcus studied her closely. You didn't try to confront him before tonight? Ask him directly. I wanted to believe him, Evelyn whispered. Every time I doubted, he'd look me in the eye and say, Evie, you're my world. And I believed it. I wanted to. Because if I didn't, then what was my life worth? 20 wasted years. She choked back a sob. But tonight, he couldn't hide it anymore. His body betrayed him. The detective leaned in, his voice steady. So you picked up the gun. You aimed it at him. And you pulled the trigger. Her eyes hardened, filling with a strange clarity. I didn't kill my husband tonight. I killed the lie. I killed the rot. Whatever he wasn't my husband anymore. The silence afterward was suffocating. The buzzing light flickered again. Marcus tapped his pen softly, his gaze never leaving her. Do you regret it? He asked finally. Her answer came without hesitation. I regret that it came to this. I regret that I ever let him make me believe in him. But pulling that trigger. She shook her head, tears streaking down her face. No, that was the only honest thing I've done in 20 years. Marcus closed his notepad slowly, the scrape of the cardboard echoing in the quiet room. He had heard confessions before, cold, calculated admissions of guilt or frantic denials. But Evelyn's words were different. They carried the weight of someone who had already been sentenced long before she fired the gun. He stood, signaling to the officers outside the door. We're done here for now. As they entered to escort her back to holding, Evelyn lifted her eyes once more. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but every syllable cut deep. Detective, he died at my birthday table. But don't you see? I died long before that. Marcus froze for a fraction of a second, the words settling in his chest like lead. Then he nodded to the officers. The cuffs clinked as they pulled Evelyn to her feet. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She simply walked, shoulders slumped, her birthday dress dragging across the sterile floor, leaving behind the faint smell of roses and wine. Marcus remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from him. The notepad lay open, filled with scribbled words, but none of them seemed to capture what had just unfolded. He pressed his pen against the page and wrote one sentence. She didn't kill him for who he was. She killed him for what he made her believe. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta was packed to the rafters. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, reporters jostling for a chance to broadcast the latest update in what had become one of the most sensational cases in years. Headlines blared across every television screen. Birthday horror. Wife shoots husband over shocking discovery. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Spectators filled every bench, whispering, craning their necks for a glimpse of the woman who had stunned the nation. Evelyn Monroe walked into the courtroom wearing a plain navy dress borrowed from the jail's supply, her wrists unshackled for the trial, but her posture rigid with the weight of what she carried. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. Detective Marcus Hill sat quietly near the prosecution's table, his gaze steady as he watched her take her seat at the defense table beside her attorney. He had seen hardened criminals, cold-blooded killers, but Evelyn was different. She looked less like a murderer and more like a woman who had been hollowed out by grief and rage. The judge, Harold Benton, took his seat at the bench, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He adjusted his glasses, lifted his gavel, and called the room to order. The murmurs died instantly. Court is now in session, Judge Benton declared. The state of Georgia versus Evelyn Monroe. At the prosecution's table, Paul Harrington rose. A stern man in his 50s with a square jaw and steel-gray hair, Harrington carried himself with the authority of a man who had sent dozens to prison. He buttoned his suit jacket and faced the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice sharp and commanding. "This case is not complicated. The defendant, Mrs. Evelyn Monroe, took a firearm, aimed it at her husband of 20 years, and shot him dead across their dining room table. This was not an accident. This was not self-defense. This was murder." He walked slowly, letting his words sink in. "Yes, you will hear that the defendant claims she was provoked by what she says she saw. But let me be clear, shock, anger, even betrayal do not justify execution. In this country, we do not solve our problems with bullets. We use reason, we use the law." Harrington pointed directly at Evelyn, his voice cutting through the silence. She had a choice that night. She chose murder. The jury's eyes shifted toward Evelyn. She sat motionless, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. At the defense table, Caroline Mitchell rose next. Young, sharp, and unflinching, she had built her reputation on defending the broken and forgotten. She stepped forward, her heels echoing across the wooden floor, her voice steady but rich with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "what happened on the night of Evelyn Monroe's birthday was not murder. It was the shattering of a human soul." She paced gently in front of the jury box, her gaze sweeping the room. For 20 years, Evelyn believed in a man who told her she was his world. She gave him her trust, her body, her life. And on her 45th birthday, at the very table where he promised her forever, she discovered a truth so grotesque, so unbearable, that her reality collapsed in an instant. Caroline's voice broke just slightly, enough to make the jurors lean in. "Imagine seeing the man you love, your husband, suddenly revealed as a walking lie, his body betraying everything he had hidden. Imagine the terror, the disgust, the rage." In that moment, Evelyn did not act with reason. She acted with trauma. She acted like any human being whose world had been ripped out from under them. She turned toward Evelyn, who sat silently, her eyes glistening. "This case is not about murder. It is about what happens when a human heart finally breaks under the weight of betrayal." The room stirred. The jury shifted in their seats, some looking at Evelyn with something almost like sympathy. Judge Benton's gavel brought order again. "Proceed with witnesses." The prosecution called its first witness, Detective Marcus Hill. He took the stand, his oath delivered with calm authority. Harrington approached. "Detective Hill, you arrived at the Monroe residence shortly after the shooting, correct?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "And what did you see?" Marcus's voice was steady. "I saw Mr. Monroe deceased on the dining table, a gunshot wound to the chest. Mrs. Monroe was sitting against the wall, the firearm on the floor. Did she resist arrest?" Harrington asked. "No." "And what did she say to you when you first confronted her?" Marcus hesitated. "She said, 'He gave me 20 years of lies. Tonight, I gave him the truth.'" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Harrington nodded grimly. No further questions. Caroline rose for cross-examination, her voice softer, warmer. "Detective Hill, in your professional opinion, did Mrs. Monroe seem cold or calculating when you arrived?" Marcus shook his head. "No. She seemed broken, like she had already lost everything." "Did she appear hysterical? Delusional?" "No. She appeared traumatized." Caroline smiled faintly. "Thank you, Detective. No further questions." Next came the medical examiner, describing the cause of death, the bullet wound, the time of death. The details were clinical, but the effect was chilling. Each word etched deeper into Evelyn's fate. Then, at last, it was time for Evelyn herself. She stood slowly, her knees trembling, and walked to the witness stand. The room fell silent, every eye on her. She raised her hand, swore the oath, and sat down, her fingers twisting in her lap. Caroline approached gently, her voice low and careful. "Evelyn, can you tell the jury what happened that night?" Evelyn's voice cracked. "It was supposed to be a celebration. He brought me roses. He made dinner. He told me he loved me. And then it happened." Her breathing hitched. Something crawled out of him. A maggot. I thought I was seeing things. But it was real. And in that moment, I knew. Everything I had feared, everything I had ignored, it was all true. He had been lying to me, rotting from the inside. bringing disease and betrayal into my home. Her tears flowed freely now. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't reasoning. I was drowning in 20 years of lies. And then the gun was in my hand. And I pulled the trigger. The jury leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Caroline asked softly, "Do you regret it?" Evelyn wiped her cheeks with shaking fingers. "I regret ever believing him. I regret wasting my life." But that shot. Her voice steadied, clear and sharp. "That was the only honest thing left between us." Gasps echoed through the gallery. The prosecutor rose like a storm, striding toward her. "Mrs. Monroe, are you telling this jury that murder was your idea of honesty?" Evelyn met his gaze, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm telling you it was the truth. And the truth is all I had left." The courtroom erupted, whispers, murmurs, flashes of cameras as reporters scribbled furiously. Judge Benton banged his gavel, his voice booming. "Order! Order in the court." As Evelyn was led back to the defense table, Caroline placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. The trial was far from over, but the line had been drawn. To some, she was a cold-blooded killer. To others, she was a woman pushed past the edge by betrayal too grotesque to bear. And to Evelyn Monroe herself, she was simply the truth, stripped bare at last. The jury deliberated for nearly 2 full days. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, broadcasting every rumor, every whisper of how the 12 men and women behind closed doors might be leaning. America was divided. Some demanded justice for a man shot dead in his own home. Others insisted Evelyn Monroe was already a victim long before she pulled the trigger. On the morning of the verdict, the courtroom was silent enough to hear the creak of benches as people leaned forward. Evelyn sat at the defense table, her hands folded tightly, her body trembling as though she were bracing for execution. Caroline Mitchell whispered something in her ear, calm, steady words Evelyn barely heard over the thunder in her chest. Judge Benton entered, his gavel bringing the room to order. "Bring in the jury." One by one, the jurors filed in, faces pale and unreadable. Evelyn's heart clenched. She searched their eyes for mercy, but found only shadows. The foreperson stood, a slip of paper in hand. His voice was steady, but the weight of the words was crushing. "In the case of the state of Georgia versus Evelyn Monroe, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of voluntary manslaughter." The words hung in the air like a bell toll. Not murder in the first degree, not life without parole, but not innocence either. Evelyn's body sagged in her chair, her chest heaving with the strange, disorienting mix of relief and devastation. She had escaped the harshest punishment, but she would not escape punishment at all. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some spectators shook their heads, outraged that she hadn't been convicted of murder. Others wept quietly, relieved she wouldn't spend the rest of her life in a cage. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing, the headline already writing itself. "Birthday killer convicted. Evelyn Monroe guilty of manslaughter." Judge Benton's voice cut through the chaos. "Sentencing will follow." He glanced down at Evelyn, his stern face softened just slightly. "Mrs. Monroe, you will serve 15 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 10. Evelyn closed her eyes, the tears spilling at last. 10 years. 10 years for 20 wasted. 10 years for the truth that had killed her husband, and her life along with him. When the courtroom emptied, Detective Marcus Hill lingered near the back, watching as deputies prepared to escort Evelyn away. He approached the defense table, his tall frame casting a shadow across her small, slumped figure. She looked up at him through swollen eyes. For a moment, they simply studied one another, two people bound together by the same night, the same shot that had ended a life and shattered another. Marcus finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "You'll carry this forever, Evelyn. Not the gunshot. The 20 years before it." Her lips quivered, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that's the part that already killed me." He nodded slowly, as though he understood. Then he stepped back, watching as the deputies guided her to her feet. The chains clicked into place around her wrists. The spectators had cleared out, but the room still echoed with the memory of the verdict. The birthday cake had long since been cleared from the Monroe dining room, the candles extinguished, but the image lingered in every mind. A woman in a party dress, a man dead across a table, roses scattered on the floor. As Evelyn shuffled toward the door, Caroline leaned in and whispered, "This isn't the end of you. 10 years isn't forever. Don't let him take more from you than he already has." Evelyn gave her a faint, broken smile. But in her heart, she knew something Caroline didn't. Thomas had already taken everything. When the doors closed behind her, the courthouse settled back into silence. The trial was over, but the story would live on in whispers, in headlines, in the nightmares of everyone who had witnessed it. For Evelyn Monroe, there was no victory in the verdict, only survival. And survival felt like another kind of prison. The prison cell was small, no larger than the Monroe walk-in closet where Evelyn once kept her dresses and shoes. The walls were dull concrete, the bed a thin cot bolted to the floor. She sat on its edge most nights, staring at the barred window, listening to the muffled voices of other inmates echo through the corridors. 15 years. That was the sentence Judge Benton had pronounced. But time didn't pass the same way inside. Days blurred into each other. Nights felt endless. And no matter how far she tried to push the memory away, it always came back. The birthday table, the roses, the flickering candles, and Thomas's lifeless body sprawled across the cake. Sometimes she swore she could still smell the frosting mingled with blood. Evelyn spent hours replaying her life, turning it over like a cracked record. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of dinners, vacations, anniversaries. 20 years of trust she had guarded like gold. And in the end, it had all crumbled in seconds. The women in the prison whispered about her when they thought she wasn't listening. "That's the birthday killer," they said. "Shot her husband dead on her own special day." Some of them admired her for it. Others feared her. Evelyn didn't care. Labels no longer mattered. She was no longer Evelyn the wife, or Evelyn the neighbor, or Evelyn the woman in the navy dress standing trial. She was just Evelyn, the hollowed-out shell left behind after 20 years of lies. Every now and then, Caroline Mitchell came to visit. The young attorney always carried the same determined calm, trying to offer words of hope. "You'll get parole," Caroline said one afternoon, her hand resting on the plexiglass between them. 10 years. Maybe less. You'll walk free again. Evelyn gave her a sad smile. "Free?" She shook her head. "I was in prison long before these walls, Caroline. I just didn't see the bars yet." When Caroline's visits ended, Evelyn sat alone in the rec yard, watching the sky shift from gray to orange at sunset. That was when the memories hit hardest. She would close her eyes and be back in that dining room, staring at the candles glowing on the cake. The flames flickered stubbornly even as Thomas collapsed, even as blood seeped into the tablecloth. Those candles had burned while everything else burned out. Her trust, her marriage, her life. She sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had blown them out instead of pulling the trigger. Would she still be living in the lie, pretending not to see the shadows? Would she have survived another 20 years of silence and betrayal? Or would she have died quietly, eaten away by the same rot that had consumed him? In the stillness of her cell, Evelyn admitted the truth she could never say in court. The bullet hadn't just ended Thomas's life. It had ended hers, too. The woman who had clung to love, who had built her world around loyalty and trust, had died the moment the gun went off. The body that remained was only a reminder, serving time for both of them. On the anniversary of that night, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She imagined the dining room once more, the table set for two, the roses in their vase, the jazz humming from the stereo. She saw Thomas smiling across from her, saw the maggot writhing into the light, and felt again the hollow collapse in her chest. But then she imagined something else, the candles finally sputtering out, their smoke curling into the air, leaving the room in darkness. She whispered into the empty cell, her voice barely audible. "Happy birthday, Evelyn." And for the first time, she let the darkness stay.